About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Somehow we can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, died with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with me. Be free. Now looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, died with my own doubts. Be free.
I've improved by a whole grade.
I've improved
by a whole grade.
by a whole grade.
By a whole grade.
My teacher isn't just Mr. Maddock. It's a whole teaching team made up of James, Mike and Marta.
My classroom's all about doing and applying. My days standing at the front of the classroom with a PowerPoint are long gone.
I master every concept by learning at my own pace.
I spend 100% of my class time interacting and supporting individual students.
I move on only when the moment is right for me, not the whole class.
I know what each and every student is mastering and struggling on at every moment.
I know exactly what I need to learn next, and I can go back and review material at any time.
I spend my teaching time supporting and inspiring, not planning, delivering and marking.
I can learn from anywhere at any time.
I can switch off when school closes, knowing they are learning from the best.
My teacher has my homework marked before I get to class.
I set every piece of homework at the start of the year.
I'm 2 weeks ahead of my expected progress.
I can track everyone's progress with a swipe of a finger.
I can track my own progress and set my own targets.
I now have time to focus on developing the skills of every learner in my classroom.
I know exactly what it means to explain, evaluate and analyse, and I'm not afraid of any exam.
My lessons are now far more about the skills and the application, not just the content itself.
I've completely remodeled what it means to be a teacher in my classroom.
Good afternoon, one and all. It is 1 o'clock
On what day is it? Thursday, the 3rd of May 2018. It is May. Exams are looming. So we are here and we're doing some revision. A couple of things before we get started on this process. We've got a lot of content to cover today. First of all, subscribe to the channel. It's really important. As I've said numerous times before, it's a small act for you. It's a significant act for us and allows us to keep doing that, keep doing this sort of thing. So support us by subscribing to the channel. Also, click notifications on, please, when you get that option. That just means that you get to see what we're producing, and we'll be producing things regularly, even more so when we make a very big move in the next few days, which you'll be hearing about quite soon. Anyway, so that's that. Secondly, you should have your notes pages in front of you, students. If you haven't got your notes, if you're watching this live and you haven't got your notes pages, and you can quickly print them off, they're in the description just down there. So get those notes pages and get them printed off. If you're in the classroom, you've probably already got those. If you're on demand, you can obviously get them from the description as well. And it makes a big difference to you to follow this session through with the notes, to contextualize and to be able to answer the questions that we've provided as well. That brings me to my next point. We are going to be, we're going to be delivering to you something like 40-45 minutes within this hour session. So you're going to have something like 15 minutes available to write your answers, okay? To write your answers, and you might even choose to submit your answers to us. And Marta, who's with us today, is going to quickly show you how you can submit your answers to our questions.
So yes, all you need to do is go to theeverlearner.com, click on News here at the top, and then you will find here interactive questions. Click here and find today's session in the GCSE. See if I find it. Here we go. Session 4, training methods. Click on here, and here is your your interactive question for today. Once you've completed it, don't forget to click submit.
Good stuff. And guys, just to repeat on that one, and teachers out there, we're going to get back to every person that submits an answer. So it's a great class activity for you guys to have a go answering those questions, submit them, and we'll provide feedback to you. And we will also be republishing those that we feel are really coherent answers. Secondly, in terms of interaction today, please get in touch with us on the hashtag revision break. Let us know what you're doing within your revision breaks. We love to see those photos. We always present them into the stream if they are appropriate. So if you do send it in, we will put you in. You need to have the agreement of the person you're photographing if there's more than one of you in the shot for us to be able to show it. So please do it that way. Go on, Marta, sorry.
Or if there is a person who is not you.
Or if it's a person not you, indeed. Now, before we get started onto the session, I should have done this right at the start. Let me introduce my two colleagues who are with me today. We have Marta, who you've already heard from.
Hello, good afternoon.
So Marta's controlling the feed, and she's kind of getting herself psychologically prepared because she's delivering her Spanish GCSE session it's at 4, isn't it? At 4 o'clock. We also have Mike with us today.
Hello.
So Mike is controlling the social media today, so get in touch. He will pick up on any questions or anything you're unsure about or any photographs that you share, and he'll get them to Marta so we can include them in the feed. Final thing from me, a kind of little hook for you teachers out there. We, as a company, are about a couple of days away from 2 gigantic announcements that we are going to hope you guys are going to hear about. Start to prepare yourself. It's looking pretty exciting. Now, Marta, I am ready. If you are, we can switch to the canvas.
Yep, let's go.
Okay, so here we are. And to be honest with you, we've got quite a lot of information already on your notes pages and already for you to potentially write about these concepts. What I want to do is put a bit of meat and understanding around each of these training methods. Again, let me be clear. We are separating them into aerobic and later anaerobic methods, not because that's exactly how it's specified on your course structure. It's just a way of delineating why we're looking at some in the first session and some in the second session. When I say aerobic methods, what I'm talking about here are methods which are focused on developing cardiovascular endurance, or if it's the word you use, cardiovascular fitness. For those of you that study a notion of VO2 max, you obviously want to be drawing that into this consideration as well. Only some of you look at that concept. Now, there's really, I guess, some key facets to studying any training method. First of all, we want to be able to describe it. That would seem really, really useful to be able to describe this. What are the facets of the training method? But the other thing I want to be able to do is to apply the FIT principle. Now, I know you on the Educator WJC Welsh WJC board, you're going to say to me, well, we don't use the time, we use duration. Figure it out, okay? Duration and time, they're the same things, right? So we're going to apply the FIT principle. So to each of those, we're going to apply this notion. Now, I want to start with this idea of continuous training. And really, it does what it says on the tin. How do you say that phrase? It does what it says on the can. You know what I mean? It is fairly obvious that continuous training involves continuous and what I'm going to describe to you as rhythmical exercise. Continuous and rhythmical exercise. So a couple of things for me to begin with. I want to know that I can use the word rhythmic exercise. Rhythmic exercise. And you might be thinking to me, well, what do you mean by rhythmic exercise? Is that to music? Is that a kind of dance? No, we're saying that it's one step after the next, 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 or if we're swimming, one arm action after the next, after the next, after the next. It's some kind of consistent or steady state rhythm. And therefore we can consider this a form of rhythmic exercise. Another point for me, which is really important, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but there's no breaks. Okay, when we say no breaks, we mean there are no rest periods within it. So this, by definition, is the opposite of what we'd refer to as an intermittent exercise. Think about something like interval or weight training. These are intermittent exercises, but this isn't because it involves no breaks whatsoever. We already know that this model is aerobic. Now, when we're talking about aerobic, really, we want to apply this to the FIT principle. So if we take intensity for a second, we mean by that we are applying an intensity of something like 60 to 80% of HR max, of heart rate max. Now, remind yourselves how to calculate heart rate max in the simplest form, and that is you take the maximum figure of 220 beats per minute and you subtract your age. So for you guys taking this tutorial, assuming you're 16 just for a moment, your maximum heart rate is going to be in the region of 204 beats per minute. So therefore, we are interested in finding out 60% of that, okay? 60% for the lower end. And let me be clear, when we talk about the aerobic zone, this 60% of your maximum is what we call the lower end, and this is what we call the upper end. In reality, if we're working with really, really high quality aerobic athletes, they are going to be going into your 85% of heart rate max during their training. That is going to happen. But the zone we're going to focus on for now is 60 to 80%. Now, the other point I'd make about that is that for this athlete here, I would say, I mean, just purely from an aesthetic perspective, she looks like quite a regular runner to me. It looks like she's done that before, right? So I would be expecting her to be nearer that 80% level if she's doing this 2 to 3 times a week. All right, so it's not just that we're somewhere in between 60 and 80%. No, we're specifically finding a point, or because heart rate is very changeable, we are going to be obviously looking at a range within that, because you can't stay at one heart rate by design. But we are going to find that with someone who's well trained, we're going to be nearer that 80%. Remember that anything less than 60%. Anything less than 60% is what we call fat burning. It's all of a sudden not kind of aerobic conditioning. Things like walking, things like doing kind of gardening, things like that, washing the car, they're going to be in that fat burning zone. So we're not so much interested in that because we're looking at aerobic conditioning. Okay, a couple of points. This one's already up here. We've got the, by the way, we can call that low, or what I like to call moderate intensity exercise. Okay, so if I just come back up slightly. We're talking about low to moderate intensity exercise. Can you get that language into your answers? Moderate intensity. We can be specific with what that is, moderate intensity. And we're saying here it's a minimum of 20 minutes. Now, the other thing I put in here for you is kind of the time phasing. So we're talking here about 20 minutes up to 120 minutes. Now I know, again, some of you are going to say to me, well, you can train for longer than 2 hours doing continuous training. That is true, but that would be a very, very extensive training period, okay? Competition period, yes, if you're doing marathon, triathlon, endurance-based stuff, Ironman 70.3, whatever, all that stuff, yes, you're going to go longer than that, and that's where kind of refueling comes in and so on. But this 20 minutes is actually an interesting figure. Without getting into it in too much detail, 20 minutes represents the average time it takes a human being to be able to get activated and start moving fat to the muscle, which is then burned aerobically. So this is not an accidental number. 20. It's not like, oh, you know, roughly 20 minutes. No, 20 minutes is actually how long it takes on average to get fat into the muscle for oxidation, for producing energy. Okay, so therefore this is at least partially why we define this 20 minutes. Other points I want to get to. We can often consider, this is in the more kind of elevated knowledge here, we often consider continuous training to be graduated. You might be thinking, well, what do you mean, James, graduate? Does that mean you start jogging, then you do some sprinting? No. What we find with graduate continuous training is for someone that's particularly unfit, they can start do it by sort of brisk walking. You know, their first 5 sessions could be brisk walking. Then they could get into very light jogging. So that's where jog helps us out there. And then once fitness is up a little bit, we're into the notion of running. Okay, now you can compare that to cycling and swimming based activities. I'm just going to talk about running just for the sake of it here. Now, finally, I want to talk about this word here, steady state. Okay, steady state exercise. Now, steady state's an interesting word. Scientifically speaking, it means that oxygen supply is meeting oxygen demand. So what we'd find, of course, in the oxygen consumption curve is we'd have a plateau, we'd have a steady state. So that steady state aerobic exercise means that we are providing enough oxygen to power the movement once we are into the activity. And it's a nice term for you to use. Now, we always want to be prepared to evaluate. So with this evaluation, of course, we're looking at strengths and weaknesses and a conclusion. So let's look at our strengths. Continuous training is simple. It's cheap. So if we were nicking a term from fitness testing, we could say it's got very good practicality, right? We can also measure the intensity. So we've got good intensity accuracy. Think of that in a technological way as well, in terms of proliferation of heart rate monitors, of Fitbits, of devices on phones. We can be very accurate with our training zones. Next, this is all age groups. Aspects of continuous training can be done by the young, the adult and the elderly. Now, I know some of you can say to me, continuous training for young children, James. Okay, there's limitations to that. But broadly speaking, anyone who's in a training age can do this. And it's essential. And what we mean by this is that even if your performance is not purely aerobic, you're very likely to use this training in that's not going to work, in something like I don't think that's working either. Something like a pre-season, okay? So that general conditioning work in pre-season is also really essential to athletes. Now, on the negative side, people find it monotonous or tedious. In other words, people will go, oh, it's boring, I don't like going out running, for example. It's time consuming, you know, a 30-minute run takes 40 minutes. What James means by that, well, why am I talking about myself in the third person? What I mean by, why do people do that? What I mean by that is warm up 10 minutes, 30-minute run. You've probably got a bit of a cool down at the end as well. That's a 45 minute adventure for the gains you're looking for. And if we look at some of the some like HIIT training, high intensity interval training, only some of you study it, but it's much faster. Right, it's weight bearing. What does that mean? That means that this person may end up having problems in joints over a long period of time. Okay, so we've got some weight bearing issues here. Overuse injuries, things like stress fractures, things like shin splints, these sorts of processes can happen because if people do too much running, for example. And this is a really interesting one. Continuous training is thought to decrease maximum speed. So if a performer has a combination in their performances of speed and endurance work, this might not be at least the type of training to do in isolation, not the one to do in isolation. Now, let's then look at an alternative. And I repeat, I'm not going to look, let me also say I didn't really apply everything there. So we've done our intensity, we've done our time. We're going to do type by looking at a different one that in a moment. In terms of frequency, we're looking, a great figure to use here is 3 times a week, and we would consider that to be a minimum period. Okay, you should have said that. The same applies here, 3 times a week for fartlek training, and we could obviously vary these and mix these up. What is fartlek training? Well, we always love to make that point is, well, it's Swedish for speed play, fine. But what does that mean? It means that this activity is really well suited to people like games players, especially people like midfielders, say, and people who take part in sort of varied terrain. So something like a cross-country runner over the winter is going to be well suited to something like fartlek training. So how does it work? So it's an endurance training. We can certainly say that. It's good for games players and cross-country runners. I've just wasted everyone's time by writing it out again. And look at here, it's speed play, but speed play means that we've got changes in terrain, in speed, and in incline. So let me be clear on this. Let's say we go for our 20-minute minimum period. Let's say we go for our 20 minutes. We are going to vary the speed of the run. So all of a sudden we can't call this steady state. We are going to be building up kind of little oxygen debts, and next we're going to do some anaerobic work. We could vary the incline. So doing some hill sprints or hill running would be a good example. And we could vary the terrain, and by varying the terrain, for example, we could run on grass instead of the concrete of the paths. We could run on fields. We could run in sort of boggy conditions. We could run on sand. This changes the condition in which the athlete experiences, in our case, the running phenomenon. Okay, so these things allow us within that period to work on different aspects of aerobic performance. But notice as well, because of this, we are potentially doing some anaerobic work. I mean, we're always doing anaerobic work, let's be honest, but we're potentially doing more anaerobic work. So this training method is aerobic and endurance based, but it begins to flirt with the notion of anaerobic thresholds. Now, let's also have a look at some strengths and weaknesses evaluation. So first of all, we've got more varied than continuous, so it kind of defeats this monotonous point, hopefully. It's non-rhythmical. In other words, it doesn't become tedious because we're just doing the same things over and over again. We've got different sessions, so you train, let's take our 3 times a week figure, we train 3 times a week, and the session's different each time. We're doing fartlek tonight. What we're doing, we're running on the beach. Now, okay, you need a beach available, but it varies the experience, right? You get the idea. It's more sport specific, so again, come back to our games players, the changing intensity. And again, it can incorporate speed, whereas continuous training can limit speed. But we have negatives. So we need the locations, we need the countryside paths, we need the fields, we need the beaches, we need the sand to be able to do this. And the other thing is, this is a very individual training. Now I'm going to say to you, do you think that's a weakness of the training method? Well, the point would be, if we're planning group training, this would become harder. So imagine you're doing fartlek training for goalkeepers. They probably wouldn't do it. Defenders, midfielders, and attackers. Okay. If you had one single session for all of that, you're probably missing the requirements for all of them in one form or another. If you try and generalize it, you know, the sprinters are going to need, the forwards and the attackers are going to need more short, sharp sprint work with kind of active walking rest. The midfielders are going to need more steady state, moderate intensity work in that continuous training fashion, and so on and so on. So how do you get a group identity to all of that? Now, we also want to answer some questions. In fact, I'm probably going to make this a little bit bigger. I think that's probably a bit small. Oh, this makes me nervous doing this on the when things are live. Okay, let me make that a bit bigger. Let me drag it across. There we go. That's nice. So we've got a question here. Evaluate. Well, we already know what that means because we just looked at it. It means give strengths and weaknesses. The other point I'd make about evaluation is ideally you should really reach a conclusion. Okay. Now, in this case, we were only doing 5 marks. This is probably not a level question, but if you want to make it a level question, by all means, bump your marks up and write it as if it was. Okay, so we're just giving an example of a structure. It's not to say it's going to be exactly like this. Evaluate continuous training as a method of developing aerobic endurance or aerobic fitness. Just check which term you use, aerobic endurance or aerobic fitness. I mean, you obviously know it's talking about the same thing, but which term would you use, cardiovascular endurance or cardiovascular fitness? So let's go about having a go at this. I want to give strengths and weaknesses, and I want really to reach a conclusion. Let me just make sure I've got my stuff ready. First point, look at this. A strength. Okay, straight away I'm into the evaluative mentality. What do you notice about my introduction? How long is it? Where is the introduction? There is none. Okay, so I'm straight in. A strength is, well, that's my introduction. My introduction ends there, doesn't it? A strength is it works the athlete in the aerobic zone of 60 to 80%. Now, of course, 60 to 80%, let me just change that green slice. It should be red. What am I doing? 60 to 80% heart rate max, must have the units, is likely to get us a mark. A weakness, look, I'm evaluating, I must look at the side, is that it can reduce speed. Thank you. I'm clearly evaluating the methodology. It's clear I am evaluating. Please, I urge you guys out there, if you're asked to evaluate, you must do exactly that. I know some of the teachers are advising that if you get an evaluation question first, you must describe it, then you must explain it, and then you must evaluate. This sort of thing, okay? If you've been advised by your teachers, feel free to follow that methodology. My point to you, and my point to any teacher that's advised that, is how can you evaluate something without describing it? Would you all agree that that 60 to 80% heart rate max is a descriptive point regarding this methodology of training? It would be odd in any kind of typical human behaviour to do all the descriptive points, continuous training is 60 to 80%, it's steady, and then to start evaluating it. Okay, so my point would be, if you do a good evaluation, you've got descriptive points by nature in there. Okay, so there's my little offering. So, which is important in sprint finishes. So I'm saying why reducing speed would be bad in this case for Kate. Let's move on. On the one hand, comma, don't forget that little comma, on the one hand, comma, it is long duration. Okay, so we've got long duration. Could I have been more specific there? Could I have said something along the lines of a minimum of 20 minutes? Could I have said it would be 45-minute training session? Okay, long duration, so suits aerobic athletes. On the other hand, comma, athletes find it tedious. I could have used the word monotonous in there. Athletes find it tedious or monotonous. And how do I finish this process off? Oh, look. In conclusion, comma, because you're always going to put that in there, continuous should be varied with fartlek or HIIT. So I'm recommending that the best thing to do is to mix this up with fartlek training or with HIIT training. Remember, only some of you study HIIT. Check if you do study it, but it's an aerobic methodology. So there's my evaluation. Next, I've got an explain why question. Explain why fartlek. So here's my command. Here's my command, explain why. As soon as we see explain why, we are becausing, we are therefore commaing, we are this meansing, this means. We could be using through, this tends to be more explain how actually. We could be using by, that sort of language shows that we're thinking through the explaining why methodology. Explain why fartlek training is a relevant training method for a games play. And of course, we've got Julie here, who's our example. So let's have a little look at the answer. Look what I've got straight away. This is because, again, where's my introduction? Where's my waffling opening statement? Oh, there isn't one. And should you make any? No. Get on with your answer. This is because fartlek involves changes in intensity. Changes in intensity, much like games. Okay, so it's game related through varied speed. So now I get my second point there. I could say incline or terrain, of course, but incline and terrain is not as closely related to netball, for example. Excuse me, I might sneeze in a moment. I'll try and keep going. Hopefully I can ward it off. Next, therefore, comma, so that I'm clearly in the explaining modality. Therefore, comma, fartlek maintains speed, which of course was our weakness for our continuous training, and works both aerobic and anaerobic systems. So I've got my max. So for me, the content we've already, you guys, it's not going to be difficult for you guys to learn that content. You just got to learn it and remember it basically. But for me, the skill here is really important because I'm clearly evaluating here and I'm clearly explaining why here. And this is not a difficult thing to do. It's difficult if you've learned key points and never evaluated them before. It's difficult if you've confused between what describe and explain means. But other than that, as long as you understand the concepts, getting your knowledge down should be nice and straightforward.
Okay, and we're back. So hopefully that's been a useful session to you. Marta was just saying to me that there have been a couple of little moments where we got a little bit of just a sound drop. We don't have any drop frames really at all in terms of the visual, but we're just catching a couple of times on the sound. There's just a little moment where the sound goes. Now, we've got excellent output on our system here, so there's got to be something between us and YouTube, which is there's something not connecting. So we'll have a little look into it. We're pretty sure it's not affecting anyone in terms of you being able to use session, but just so you know, we're aware of it anyway. Okay, any questions?
Yes,
Ooh,
I have a question.
That was a lot of enthusiasm.
Yeah, just to wake up those who may have had a little nod during the break.
What are you trying to say?
No, nothing.
No,
James,
fire away.
I would like you to clarify a little bit your point about description in evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
Could you please clarify what you meant about there not being a description when you're evaluating?
Okay, so it's going to be difficult for me to be absolutely specific here to your exact exam board, and I encourage every single student out there to follow the guidance that you've been given by your teacher for the last 2 years. Okay, I think that is the main message, because who am I at this late stage to tell you to scrap that and to do something else? I'm just this guy who's on YouTube and offering you some insight into some possible topics. So on that basis, follow the guidance and the advice you've been given by your teacher, and especially if you've been practicing that over and over again, that is by far your most reliable way to prepare yourself for your exams. The point I was making, and I think at this point I'm now talking to teachers at this point, is that if we look at, and it varies by the way for exam board to exam board, if we look at AO1 through to AO3, and remember they are different for different exam boards, there has been a tendency for something like an evaluate question to, well, it will incorporate different assessment objectives. So on that basis, some teachers have interpreted that and have said, well, students, what you have to do is you have to describe the concept and then afterwards you have to evaluate it. The point I would throw back to people, and it's completely open to you how you interpret this information, is that by definition it's not possible to evaluate something without describing it. If I take this digital pen, well, it's not digital, but it works in a digital setting. You know, if I'm going to describe this, I'm going to call it solid plastic, robust, it doesn't emit ink, these are the characteristics. If I'm going to evaluate, I'm going to say a strength of this pen is it's made of solid, robust plastic and it's hard to break. So that's an evaluative statement, but it involves a description. If I say a weakness of this pen is that it does not emit ink and therefore is not appropriate for writing onto paper, I am describing the characteristic of the pen, but I'm doing that within an evaluative statement. So my point is that if we really want to encourage coherent writing, that ideally should be the way that we look to do it. But let me suffix it once more, that every student who is listening to this message is going to follow the guidance that they've been given for the last 2 years at least, from the teacher that's been in the classroom with them. And what you're going to do is you're going to continue to practice and produce your answers in the format that your teacher has advised it. I just think we've got a longer discussion to have on that one. But anyway, I'm going into like teacher training mode, so I'll stop.
Thank you.
No problem.
Not for stopping, for the explanation.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have another one from Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please explain HIT training?
Okay, so that is for some exam boards and not all. Which are they, Mike?
OCR and IGCSE.
Okay, so OCR and IGCSE. If you're AQA, EdExcel, Educast, WJC, you can drift off at this particular moment. So HIT training is high intensity interval training. It is a form of intermittent training which in the work periods is anaerobic but is highly effective at stressing the aerobic system. How? It stresses the aerobic system in two ways. First of all, in the very short, sharp recovery periods between the work periods, in the rest periods between the work periods, what the body has to do is it has to recover and replenish the oxygen deficit aerobically. So it really stresses the aerobic systems in the recovery phasing. Now, the training methodology lasts anything from 2 minutes to 20 minutes. That's pretty much a maximum period. So it's got the advantage over continuous that it's not really elongated, it might not be as monotonous, tedious, those sorts of things. The other thing about high-intensity interval training is absolutely magnificent at developing the capacity of the human body to metabolize fat. When I say metabolize, you can just replace that word if you want to burn fat. So it's a great aerobic training method because it encourages our bodies to utilize that high efficient energy store of fat, the fat that's under our skin. Not that I've got much. And as a result of that, we become more efficient aerobic athletes. So yeah, that's it.
Thanks.
It's all right, mate, no problem. Okay, any other points, anything we want to put on screen before we move on? So, I genuinely don't know what time it is. Where are we?
It's 1:33 on.
Okay, in that case we should move on because we've got all of the anaerobic stuff to do. So, Marta, I am ready. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Let's go.
Okay, and we are back. And actually, I should have a title in here. Obviously, we're talking about methods of training that would be broadly considered to be anaerobic up here. So, sorry, we should have a title in here. I apologise. So, first of all, let's get to the notion of resistance training. Just bear in mind, of course, that you may simply refer to weight training. And again, the image we've got in here does an awful lot of the job for us. Let's actually go through these points briefly and make sure that we understand some fundamental principles and key descriptors and explanatory points with regard to this methodology. So, first things first, we are saying that resistance or weight training is good for the following, okay? Now, we already know, guys, to be clear, we already know it's very good for strength, right? So we are assuming you guys already know that its key framing is towards strength development. But you notice here, it's good for speed, it's good for bulk. I mean, certain types of weight training, very high resistance, low repetition. Weight training is very good for bulking, for example. It's good for muscular endurance in the opposite scenario. So if we do high reps, lower resistance. And it's very good for rehabilitation. Now, let me emphasize this point about rehabilitation. You might be thinking, right, well, if you're injured, why would you start lifting weights on the injured part? Well, that's exactly what you don't do. Weight training is really important because it allows you to perform something called muscle isolation. What do we mean by that? Well, it means if you've injured your right shoulder, you can work on your quads, hamstrings, and calves, and your gastrocnemius. Okay, so you can work on areas of the body that are uninjured. Now, there is also a role to play in weight training once the person is back in the return phase of their recovery. But generally speaking, it's good for rehabilitation because we can isolate groups that are not injured. We can work in that way. Now, if we take for a moment the idea of intensity, okay, let's take intensity of training from our FIT principle, or if we want WJC, our FID principle. We're saying here that we measure intensity, as we see up here, look, we measure intensity as percentage of one repetition max, okay, of percentage of one repetition max. So each weight training exercise is judged by intensity by the percentage we are lifting, often in numerous reps, the percentage of our one repetition max, the maximum we can lift in that particular lift. And again, you see here, look, muscular endurance is going to be something like 55 to 75% of our one rep max. Strength can be anything, so especially if we're going towards max strength, can be anything between 70 and 100% of our one repetition max. And notice here, when we're talking about time, we've also got specific rest periods. Now, time in, let me just change colour actually. I often hear that people can't see reds very well. It's probably because your projector bulbs are not very good. Time can be broken down really into three factors in resistance training. So first of all, how many reps do we do? That is a measure of time. Get it clear in our minds. If we do 8 reps, that is not a measure of intensity. It's a measure of time. Therefore, our sets are a measure of time. And we've also got our recovery periods. How long do we recover between sets? As a measure of time. That's how we actually do that. So remind yourself that a rep, as we've got over here, is a number of lifts. Okay, so in this case, I think this athlete is squatting. If she presses down and up something like 8 times, that's going to be called 8 repetitions. If she breaks that 8 repetitions into 3 different groups of 8, then of course that's the sets. They're the groups with breaks in between. Okay, so something like 3 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 10, we've got it there. And again, we do that differently for different types of athletes. And finally, we've got the notion of control. And again, we've got this in our evaluation of strengths and weakness here. Speed of movement should be controlled within weight training. We are recommending here that each repetition should be 1.5 to 2 seconds per rep, assuming we are not training on elastic strength, okay, or explosive strength. Elastic or explosive versions would be faster, okay, 1.5 to 2 seconds per repetition. And again, with that one, that of course makes a clear distinction between this and something like plyometric training, which we're going to have a look at the moment. Evaluation, good for rehabilitation because we can isolate areas. Endless variation. The nature of this activity is that you can study it forever and not know every lift. There are certain classic fundamental lifts and resistance, but it's endlessly varied. It's very impacting. So weight training, resistance training, think about strength and conditioning training generally. Here's my sneeze again. Strength and conditioning training generally are very effective. I'm glad that actually came out because it's been sort of in there for a little while. It does impact performance. So resistance training, weight training does change performance quality. And as we said here, we can isolate muscle groups. So in the case of this performer, she may literally be working on a technique which isolates one of the 4 muscles of the quadricep. Okay, we can do it that way. On the negative side, we tend to start this with little guidance and training. So poor technique has major side effects. A great example is alignment of the core and alignment of the spine. If we get that wrong over a period of time, we can do fairly significant damage. And the other thing is, if we use a weight machine, this athlete's using a free bar, so not a free weight, so not a problem here. But if we use something like resistance machines, they control the movement for us, so we never develop the actual technique which is necessary within this formatting. Again, in terms of frequency, remind yourselves that 3 times a week is a great phrase to put in, and of course we've got lots of variations within this. Let's move on. Plyometric training. Now it's almost like we want to lump this in together with weight or resistance training, but we must resist that temptation. That would not be the case. So a couple of things that I would like you guys to draw out immediately. It involves maximal force. Get that clear. Resistance training or weight training does not necessarily involve maximal force, because we're probably not going to train at 100% of 1 repetition max. But plyometrics training is maximal force. And this point here is super important. All plyometric movements move from an eccentric contraction followed by a concentric contraction. It really defines the notion of what we mean by plyometrics training. Concentric contraction. Okay, so what do we mean by that? Okay, so in this case, what this athlete is halfway through her performance. She has started over here. Okay, she has started over here. She was probably jumped onto there. What she's now going to do is drop off and jump again. Okay, so what I want you to realize here is that as she lands on the ground here, these muscles in her quads, amongst other muscles, are going to perform an eccentric contraction. In other words, they're going to lengthen. They're going to lengthen under tension. Meanwhile, as she now takes off and jumps, as she takes off and jumps up again, that is going to be a concentric contraction. The muscle shortens under tension. And I didn't mean to write concentric, I meant to write shorten. So the muscle shortens under tension. Wasting everyone's time here, aren't I? The muscle shortens under tension. And the reason that's important is that because now these muscles in the quadricep are going to develop an elastic extensible property, much like a strong elastic band, where if you lengthen them and then shorten them rapidly, they're going to build up like this elastic, powerful tendency. So very explosive. So bounding, hurdles, medicine ball throws, depth jumps, which is what I just showed you here. All of these are classic examples. And again, we're looking here at notions of power. And if it's on your specification, you can use the term elastic strength. Okay, so explosive strength might be another way of putting that. So that's what this is for. So plyometrics does that. Evaluation, it increases power. It's central to many sports. I mean, think about how many athletes perform power movements in games, in all kinds of athletic activities. It's very effective. Okay, so this really works. On the negative side, it can be contraindicating. James, what do you mean by contraindicating? Contraindicating means that it can do more harm than good. Now, this athlete here appears to be a trained athlete, and therefore this is not going to be contraindicating. But if I do this with my 66-year-old mother who's got a problem with her back and her hip, you can see the point, right? Or if I do this with a bunch of 11-year-old kids, you can see the point. The possibility of injury is high, and that's going to outweigh the development, okay? Not suitable for unfit people, I've just mentioned that. Not suitable for young people, I've just mentioned that. So it's quite a specific and precise anaerobic methodology. Circuit training, we all know it, right? We've all been in the inclement or wet weather lesson where we all, or the health and fitness module in PE where we do a load of circuit training. We all know a bit about what it is. So let's go through some details of this. I've got quite a lot on here, but I want to go through some specific points. First of all, let's realize that we are overcoming resistance. Okay, overcoming resistance in the sense that we are going to be overcoming our body weight, lifting weights, doing star jumps, doing press-ups, whatever it happens to be. We are overcoming resistance, and the important point I want to make here is repeatedly. So because of that, this activity lends itself very closely to a notion of muscular endurance, that repeatability without fatigue of being able to perform muscular contraction. Okay, so overcoming resistance repeatedly, and therefore it's very good for muscular endurance. Generally speaking, I'm going to see it here. Let me just change colour. We're going to be looking at something like 8 to 12 stations. That is a guideline. There are exceptions, okay, but 8 to 12 stations is a classic guideline, something along those lines. And what we're going to find here is that with those 8 to 12 stations, you've got two periods. You have work and recovery. So you might work for 45 seconds in the workstation and the work period doing press-ups, say, and then you're going to have 30 to 45 seconds recovery, sometimes active recovery. Okay, so that is a classic example. Now the other point that kind of jumps out from here is we also have to think about circuit design. Okay, circuit design. If this performer here is doing these kind of burpees movements, well, the next movement, the next station is probably not going to be right, that it really heavily works the hip flexors. Okay, if we do another kind of hip flexor workout or something which is really putting pressure on the arms, for example, that design might not be functional because we're going to lead to kind of exhaustion. So there's going to be some issues there. So that circuit design and the order of the circuits, I would say, is particularly important. Other points I think are really nice to draw out of this is circuits can incorporate skill. Okay, so we've talked a lot about fitness training here, training methods for fitness. But one of the nice things about circuit is it can touch on or be directly implicating skill performance. So some kind of skill from the activity, or indeed the skill of lifting, getting the technique right, can be brought into this. Okay. Now, a couple of other things. We like to describe this as a whole body exercise because across 8 to 12 stations, you're probably going to work legs, core, arms, shoulder, everything. Okay, so it's whole body. So we like that point about it. And we can, of course, recognize the point that we've got timed work and timed recovery. I'm getting loads of ambient noise around me. Before there was a choppy dog. Now there's a choppy chopper. It sounds a bit like a helicopter. It may just be a really loud lawnmower. I'm not sure how far away it is. So we've got time work and timed recovery, timed work and timed recovery. And finally, I would say we've got the notion, potentially at least, of active recovery. A classic in circuit training is, I don't know, if you're in some kind of hall and you've got stations here, and so on. So maybe I've just worked on this station and the next one is going to be here for me, but rather than going there, what I'm going to do is during the recovery, I'm going to jog all the way around and then arrive at my station. And it makes the recovery period active for the participant. It's just an example. There's other ways of doing it. So whole body can be skill, good for muscular endurance. Timed work and recovery, a form of interval training. Bear that in mind. 8 to 12 stations. Circuit can be repeated. Okay. Classic is to do 3 circuits of 45 seconds work with 30-second recovery as an example. And we've got station design and circuit design in there. Okay. So it's versatile. It can cater for large numbers, so it's very practical. We don't need a lot of equipment. So again, it's very practical, and we can target skill and fitness. Skill and fitness, particularly muscular endurance. On the negative side, we don't really take records out because we might have 25, 30, 40, 50 people in there, so we don't know exactly who's lifted what and for how much. And you can find loafing. Loafing is like demotivation or hiding. I'm sure you've never done that, right? In a circuit training, you've always pushed yourself to the absolute limits. There's no loafing by you guys, I'm sure. Okay, let me just make this slightly bigger, a bit like last time, okay? Let's just make it a little bit more legible, especially with my dodgy old handwriting, eh? So, interesting command here. I've been asked to compare. When we compare something, we must give the similarities and differences. So we're gonna find words like similarly, comma, however. It's different in the following way. However, comma. We might also find stuff like comma space, whereas, because that happens in the middle of a sentence, comma space, whereas. So one thing is like this, whereas something else is like that. But we must compare. If I just describe weight training here, I get nothing. I must compare. Let's have a look at what it looks like. Weight training develops strength. That's correct. Comma space, whereas plyometrics develops power. Can you see that I have there compared? And I get my mark. Can you start to see immediately how if you're asked to compare something, for goodness sake, compare those two things? Again, the roadmap's going to really help you with that. Next, plyometrics always involves eccentric contractions. However, sorry, weight training does not always. Okay, so eccentric contractions in plyometric, not necessarily in weight training. Another comparative statement. Plyometrics training is explosive contractions. Comma space, whereas weight training is controlled contractions. Okay, I could say 1 to 2 seconds for the weight training. Let's finish it off. Weight training uses bars and plates, as in the weights, the resistance. However, comma, plyometrics uses medicine balls and hurdles. And I get my max. Can you guys see that I have, without doubt, without question, without hesitation, I have compared my different concepts. It cannot be argued any different. Whether the content is right is down to you guys. But for goodness sake, if you're asked to compare, what should you do? Compare. And all you need is this kind of language. We can give you a bit more of it, but you don't need much. Okay? Nice and simple. Similarly, comma, however, comma space, whereas. You're just looking at the other side. Remember that it's with comparison, you can find similarities. So I could have said in here, weight training involves working against resistance. Similarly, comma, plyometrics training involves working against resistance. I'm finding a similarity, not a difference. You can do that. In the questions, you tend to find they emphasize difference more. Not sure why that is, but they do that generally. Now, justify. Justify is a really interesting one. When we talk about justify, we're going to be saying the reason. The reason is, another reason is, one idea, could be, might be, whatever. This is how we do this. And the other thing is when we justify, you might also want to say, I think, or I believe, or in my opinion. Okay, that's what justify is asking us to do. Like, with justify, you're giving reasons for something. So let's have for the way it is. Let's have a little look at this. Justify the use of circuit training as a method of improving muscular endurance. So circuit training and muscular endurance, we wanted to justify their connection. Let's have a go. The reason for this, look, there's my reason. The reason for this is stations last for 30 to 60 seconds. Another reason is circuit training requires repeated contractions without fatigue. So it's directly related to muscular endurance. Because of this, stations are specifically ordered to prevent exhaustion. Okay, so we're getting into our justifications here. And finally, I think muscular endurance is best developed by a combination of circuit training and weight training. So we're touching there on that principle of type or variance. Some of you refer to that as, we mix our training method up. But am I justifying? Yes, I'm saying the reason for this. Another reason. Because of these reasons. In my opinion, I think, I believe, and I get my marks. So look out for that word. You should realize it means the reasons are, I think, I believe. You should be able to do that. I think, I believe. The reason is, another reason is, one idea could be, one suggestion is, and so on and so on. Let's go back to the studio.
So, are we back?
Yes, we are.
We are back, guys. Stick around to the end. We have a treat for you. Seriously. Okay, so there we go. Do we have any questions or interactions, folks? What do you want to know?
Yeah, we have one question, which is are there any components of fitness which you cannot work on in circuit training?
Good question. I need to think about that one. Are there any that you can't work on in circuit training? Where you muscular endurance, speed, strength, agility, flexibility. You can have a good go at cardiovascular endurance fitness. So there's limitations to that, but you could definitely incorporate it, not least in the recovery cycle between stations. Coordination, balance, reaction time. You can. I have the impression I'm missing some components of fitness. I'm sure I am, but the one that probably strikes me would be breaking down your types of strength. Doing something like maximum or static strength would be quite difficult because of the repetitive nature of the activities. You know, you have reps by definition, so therefore I would argue that certain types of strengths, maximum strength, static strength particularly, would be ones. Well, static strength you could have a good go at. You could get certain isolated strength moves out, for example. But yeah, maximum strength would probably be the one. But no, it's a good question. And I think that emphasizes one of its great strengths is this truly versatile method. So we've looked at it there in relation to muscular endurance, but of course it can do far more than that. Any others? Any other questions?
No, not from me.
No, not from me either.
Not for you.
No.
So for me, we talked a bit about comparing there. We don't know how many compare questions are going to come up in exam papers, but we really want to get that point home to you that if you are asked to compare, you can't just describe two different things. You have to bring them together and make a comparative judgment in that scenario there. So it's really important, I think, that you guys get into the habit of being able to do that. And one of the things I would encourage both students and teachers to think about is that when you learn something new, you might be experiencing that in your revision, for example, or you're recovering something that you've covered before. One of the questions that you could ask, or teachers, one of the questions that might reveal that your students are thinking comparatively is, how does X differ from Y? How is X similar to Y? Those are really great structures to build into lessons, to build into revision cycles, to build into the process of internalizing thinking and learning something new, or indeed revisiting something. So how is it similar? How is it different? And of course, even if you then don't get asked to compare two things directly, it's very likely that that's going to deepen your knowledge of the concepts that you're looking to learn. So for me, comparing is a crucial behavior to try and bring out within lessons, within revision. Okay, so that's me banging on about comparison. I have no idea what time we have, Marta. Give me a little indication, please.
1:56.
1:56. So this brings me on to a little treat. I thought today that what I might try to do, if I can change camera. How's that coming through, Marta?
Yeah, it is coming
if
through.
I try and change camera here, well, I have changed camera
Hello.
here, you can just get a little bit of an insight into how our studio works. So that's Marta over there. Some of you know Marta because she also does the Spanish. Some of you will be taking Spanish, I'm sure. If I can come even further, bang my head on the microphone. If I come even further round, we've got Michael over here who's operating the social media. We've also got outside there, you see, I don't know how well you can see. Let me just turn this around. I don't know how well you can see this, but we have some lovely trees out there. Really nice for us to look at. There's a couple of, there are bikes out there sort of hugging one another. That's how Marta and I get to and from the office. And if you look really carefully look, that's how you guys see me, generally speaking. So that's you guys over there. So that's kind of funky, huh? So I thought I'd give you a little bit of a treat and do it that way. So, all that being said, we're gonna try and have a little bit of fun at the end of today. Is everyone keen for this, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Are we ready? Are we ready for this moment?
We're psychologically ready.
Are we psychologically ready? I think we're ready to go. For everybody else, this is a treat. Once this happens, we can never mention it again. It becomes an entirely taboo subject. This can never be discussed if I ever meet you in person, and teachers out there.
It might not work.
And it may not work. This could go very badly wrong. Are we ready, guys?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, let's go.
About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be
confidence. The problem is, the current learning model has holes in it. Luckily, the EverLearner.com is here to fill those holes. With the EverLearner Classroom, each student is given a chance to master each subject at their own pace. With thousands of video tutorials and tens of thousands of automated questions on the site, students can progress at their own individual pace. And because every interaction is tracked within the site, teachers can review students' progress and gain access to razor-sharp data. Teachers will have more time to engage with small groups and be better informed of where their time and support is needed. With the EverLearner, teachers can leave the traditional model behind and become facilitators, coaches, and inspirers. There's a reason we have over 100,000 registered students. To learn more, visit our website today.
I apologize for everything.